Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Ghost Creatures and Scares O' My. This episode is called Hubble, Bubble, Toil and Trouble, Witches.
In this podcast, we take the entity featured in each episode of the popular show Supernatural and explore the creepy real life stories, myths, and legends that surround the theme.
This week we're looking at episode 18 of season 1 of Supernatural called Something Wicked This Way Comes. Sam and Dean investigate a small town in Wisconsin where children are falling into comas for no apparent reason. The brothers discover that a witch is creeping into the bedrooms of the children and stealing their life force. While battling the witch, Dean recalls a past mistake that almost cost Sam his life at the hands of the very same witch, an event which has fueled Dean's protectiveness over Sam and his blind obedience to his father.
So, I think this is probably my favourite Supernatural episode, potentially. This one and next week.
Fair enough. It's
I think it's
very
a really good, and the reason I think that is because it's a strong theme as well. Like the theme of like the witch, it's a, it's been a good one for us to research this week. And when I say us, I mean me. But it's where it's a really strong like vampires, witches. It's that core element, horror element, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very good episode.
It's
I do
creepy.
enjoy
It
it.
reminds me of that horror film. Do you remember from years ago? It's When Darkness Falls. I think it's called that. Where I think it's called that. It's the Tooth Fairy one where
Oh yeah,
she's like a witch that creeps in and steals the children from an old curse because they killed her.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something.
we just watched
It's
that
a
not
bit
long
like,
ago, didn't we?
yeah, it's a bit like that, isn't it? So, yeah, this episode is, as you can probably guess, it's all to do with witches, witchcraft. So, the way that we thought we'd do it is to dive into some history and folklore of where witches and the idea of sorcery originated from, and then look at some real life creepy stories that you've probably heard of, and some that maybe you haven't. So, first, before we do any of that, I just thought we'll have to address witches in pop culture because it's absolutely huge and it's why I'm so excited for this one. So if I was to say to you, witches and wizards, what do you think
Harry
of?
Potter, obviously.
Shock. Say to me, my brain instantly goes to Hocus Pocus, American Horror Story, The Coven, Salem,
Sabrina, I would have thought would be your
Sabrina
number
the
one.
Teenage Witch is my absolute. Oh, she is my hero actually,
The
one of my
OG version of
heroes.
it, anyway.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't. I watched. I think I watched 3 episodes of the new one on Netflix, and I was just not having. It was ridiculous, in my opinion. But you can't beat old school Sabrina and Harvey for me. That is true love. Yeah. So I think there's so many references to witches going all the way back. I am a proper geek. I love Macbeth as well, and I think the Three Witches in Macbeth is so creepy. Based a little bit on, you can go back even further, the Fates.
Yeah,
Isn't that Greek
it
mythology?
is.
You like your Greek mythology where they weave this tapestry and the idea that
It's fate, isn't it, Alan?
yeah, your life's kind of written out for you or weaved out for you. Yeah, I've written loads. I just write notes as I go. So Hocus Pocus, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, like I said, American Horror Story, the idea of the Supreme Witch. I love all of that. The Worst Witch. Do you remember this?
No, I don't.
On it was like a proper CCTV one, like a British after school come in,
I feel like
fish
I
fingers
might
and
have
chips,
seen
the
it or
worst
something
witch
somewhere
on
deep in my
telly.
memories, but I can't remember what it is.
You probably have Harry Potter,
Obviously,
obviously, Blair Witch,
obviously,
pioneering kind of horror film with what's it,
the cameras in it,
real,
like real footage.
yeah, real footage film. The Conjuring,
Yeah, class.
The Craft. Oh my gosh, The Craft in Practical Magic. I thought that's just peak 90s, isn't it? You're not a big fan of stuff
No,
like that. It's more girly. I love stuff like that. Fairy tales. There's always a Wicked Witch in a fairy tale.
yeah,
Merlin.
Merlin,
And
totally.
the list is endless. It's embedded in so many stories and films, but why is the idea of witchcraft so iconic, do you think?
Well, I think it's the idea of having like powers and stuff, isn't it? Just blends really well to films and TV shows and stories. Like magic is a big thing, really. Isn't it?
I think it captures the imagination, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I think of like I know Matilda isn't witchcraft, but when we were kids, the idea of Harry Potter and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the idea that you could have these magical powers, I think that just fascinated me. So if you could be a witch or a wizard for the day, what would the first spell be that you would cast? And not turn me into a frog.
but what level of magic we're talking here? We're talking Harry Potter type magic,
Well,
or we're
Matt, it's
talking
just a question.
well, it's not just
I'm
it's not just
a
a
one down and say there you go.
it's not just a question, though, is it, Amy? Like it's like a fantastic question, really, is
Yeah.
and a lot of room for thought. Um, As it's just for one day, I'd probably say fly.
You know what? That is just what I was gonna, because I was just gonna say the only correct answer to that question is get a broomstick and fly around.
Well, no, like if you could magic it, you just fly without a broom as well, wouldn't
Nah, I think I'd like the aesthetic of a broom.
you? Would you?
Yeah. I'm OG like that.
I see.
Yeah. So anyway, enough of us waffling on about things that'll never happen. Although I've still kind of got my fingers crossed that I'm going to get that letter to say I'm going to Hogwarts.
Imagine. Oh,
Yeah.
a late bloomer.
A late bloomer, yeah. So we thought we'd start with the history of witchcraft. So let's dive in. Do you know anything about the history of witchcraft?
Salem witch trials and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we can go back even further than that. So I got some information from the English Heritage site, and there was Professor Diane Purkis. Most people think that witches are a Christian invention. So the idea that I suppose witches are against the devil and persecution of witches, but actually the idea of the witch who flies in the night and draws power from dark cosmic forces to work her ill will on others, it actually predates Christianity, probably by many centuries. It's unclear exactly when witches came on the historical scene, probably as early as the Druids when we think back to, and even earlier, potentially in different cultures
It's like
around the world.
paganism, really, as well.
Paganism, yeah, Druids, a lot the idea that now it's almost alien that the idea that witchcraft could exist, but in the past it was just taken as, well, yeah, how else does the sun rise and how is life formed? Which I can understand that.
Yeah.
Um, but going back to Christianity, because that is when we got a lot of records written down. One of the earliest records of a witch is actually in the Bible, in Book 1 Samuel, thought to be written between 931 BC and 721 BC. It tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. Um, I'm a bit of a Philistine, funny enough, with stuff like this, but Endor, is that like a Lord of the Rings sound like that to you?
They sound like,
Doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if he's got that from
Either
there,
that or
maybe.
Star Wars.
Oh, no, pass. The witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's son died in battle and Saul committed suicide. Other Old Testament verses condemn witches, such as the often cited Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." So they would have used this line a lot to persecute a lot of women and some men.
Yeah.
Additional biblical passages caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. In Homer's Odyssey, 800 BC, Circe
Cersei in it.
Circe? Circe, who turns men into animals, is described as a witch, and Plutarch refers to witchcraft in his treatise on superstition. Illicit magic features heavily in Roman law as well, some of which are passed down to the Christian world. However, many of those early laws were really laws against sorcery, which, unlike witchcraft, can be beneficial and which requires special skills, tools, and words. So I put the fates down as well. I mentioned that earlier, but that's heavy in Greek culture, isn't it? The idea of witchcraft not being evil as such, it's just part of the law and things, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah. I think the Fates are the ones who like weave out all of time and stuff in it. So
Yeah.
I suppose like they're not really thinking it's a bad thing. It's like something that has to be.
It's part of the makeup of life and death. And I think, as well, am I right in saying like, Norse mythology kind of
Yeah.
potentially like
Well,
Loki, the
I
man
imagine lots of
imagine
mythologies.
isn't the Lord's like magic where he'll appear as different people and things like that. And
Well, he's like these
yeah.
ravens and stuff as well.
Yeah, so well, it's which is turned into animals, are using animals to, so it's kind of all maybe is it, obviously that this is a stupid observation, but is that why Christians hate witchcraft so much because it harks back to paganism and they wanted to drive that out?
I mean,
That's
like
quite
for saying that, but I mean, Jesus turned wine and like uh, uh,
he's a witch.
he's like water into wine and bread. Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah. Oh,
that's similar
well.
sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very similar, that isn't it? So maybe that's why Jesus isn't here. He's in Hogwarts right now.
Well, we can't be.
You repeat yourself. I don't know if I'm allowed to say
No,
that.
I don't know. Don't think so.
Yeah, ancient Egyptians. I wrote that down. That's lots of curses. The idea of summoning the dead and things like that. Very heavy on witchcraft. Native Americans. Careful with this one because a lot of Native American people object quite strongly to the way they're portrayed and being like overly spiritual and almost like comically such.
Hmm.
But they do have a long, rich folklore history as well of shamans and shape shifting and the idea of curses on the body, being driven out, and that, and like obviously animal shape shifting is a big theme as well. I put this down. I thought this was really interesting because African witch doctors, a lot of cultures in Africa historically have had shamans who are, I'll be careful how I say, maybe like priests and holy women, holy men, mortal men. Am I right in
Yeah,
saying
I
that?
think so. Yeah,
Yeah, so have you heard of hoodoo? I
yeah,
mentioned it. Yeah, so it's a variation of voodoo. It's basically a set of spiritual practices and traditions, and it was created by enslaved Africans in the southern United States from various traditional African spiritualities, Christianity, and actually elements of indigenous botanical knowledge. So practitioners of hoodoo are called root workers, conjure doctors, conjure man or conjure woman, root doctor, hoodoo doctor, swampers. Regional synonyms for hoodoo include conjure or root work. And basically, it incorporates lots of different elements and also even some enslaved West African Muslims as well, brought Islam into it as well. It's a real kind of mixture and collaboration of culture.
hmm,
And it's really heavily prevalent in New Orleans and Louisiana because a lot of slaves were brought to Haiti and were French speaking because of the captors, and you know what I mean.
yeah,
So it's yeah, and apparently following the Great Migration of African Americans, hoodoo spread throughout the United States and often uses natural elements to alter human experience, so like love spells, charms, revenge. So that's quite an interesting modern take on it, but also that drives back to the slave trade and that like a awful period of time, you know what I mean? But
yeah.
it brought that and spread that across the US. And going way back, Middle Ages, people who practiced medical and medicinal and chemical arts usually were women. They were midwives, herbalists, ale brewers. Sometimes they were accused of witchcraft, witchcraft, John, by representatives of the Christian Church in the Middle Ages. It was not magic the way it's thought about today. It was just essential, useful services, bringing babies into the world and healing ails, and they were useful, but people turned on these women very quickly because they were useful to an extent, but as soon as they couldn't cure something or someone died of a terrible birth, they got the blame and they had put a curse on them, and it was, a dangerous life to live, I think. Fast forward a few hundred years, the idea of using medicine and natural herbal remedies was a very different story. This is when witchcraft became linked to devil worship and was treated as criminal heresy. A more vitriolic and wider spread panic about witches took hold, and the figure of the witch as it's known today began to take shape visually. In later centuries, constant attempts to defeat heresy brought to light a number of figures who were difficult to reconcile with Christianity. Such figures were typically created without reference to witchcraft at all, but led to the creation of the figure of the heretic witch. One such figure was peculiar to the Western Alps. She was the female embodiment of winter, a female figure often called Bertha, or Percta, or Buffona. She punished social disobedience and rewarded goodness. She was always portrayed as an old hag because she represented cold and winter, and it didn't take long for intellectuals to note her resemblance to the witches with whom they were familiar from classic literature. Witches with broomsticks, cauldrons, um, hats, warts, rags, items that were associated with poor women, elderly women, obviously who were alone, vulnerable, really. In the 16th and 17th centuries, people across England, irrespective of their status, believed in witches. Witchcraft was first made a capital offence in 1542 under the Statute of Henry VIII, but it was repealed 5 years later. Witch fever reached new heights when witchcraft was again classed as a felony in 1562 under a statute of his daughter Elizabeth I. This led to thousands of people, mostly women, being falsely accused, forced to confess under torture, and punished. So yeah, it started brewing a lot back in the 1500s, really,
Hmm.
under Henry VIII. But Elizabeth I really took it on a lot more.
Yeah,
And then, this is kind of the period where Shakespeare was writing his plays, Macbeth, that was coming out, like lots of fascination with witches, and it was starting to turn from, fascination and almost, well, they could be good, they could be bad, to real persecution. And it was heightened very much so with by James the First of England, Six of Scotland. He was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with the persecution of witches, and many people were killed as a direct result of witch hunts and trials. So he was the guy who Guy Fawkes obviously wanted to blow up.
Yeah.
Very obsessed with it. He even had books, and almost to the point where he was he a witch himself? He was any books, probably.
Bit more
Infamously,
interested than you're letting on there.
yeah, he's trying to be the top witch.
Just get
Get
rid
rid
of
of the
competition.
competition. Infamously under the eye of Witchfinder General himself, Matthew Hopkins. So he was a really evil man. Punishments included drowning, stoning, and being burnt at the stake. And we will come on to Matthew Hopkins in a future episode soon, but he did a lot of this for money,
Hmm.
as you can imagine. He got basically paid to hunt out witches. So the more that he falsely accused, the more kind of what's the word? Notches on his bedpost? No, that's not.
Notches on his bedpost. I really don't think that's the one.
It's not the one. Notches on his broomstick. You know what I mean? The more like heads rolled, the more money in his pocket. I
Aye.
don't know. Um, in the US, we can't obviously ignore that. The infamy of the Salem witch trials will never ever be forgotten. It's a real hub and a fascination. And on Instagram, a lot of people that I follow, it's like a mecca for people who are interested in witchcraft, and it's a real, almost like a holy site in a way. So the Salem witch trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts. This was between February 1692 and May 1963, so not didn't go on as long as I thought. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed. That's not as many as I thought. 19 people. It's still people, a lot of
Yeah.
people, but I don't know why I thought it'd be hundreds of people. Um, they were sentenced to death by hanging. That was 14 women and 5 men. And one other man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death. That is not a nice way to go.
No, not at
After
all.
refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 people died in jail. So, that's the kind of background before we launch into a couple of creepy stories. Thoughts on it? How witchcraft has evolved? Anything else you wanted to add to it, really?
Well, how it's evolved, it's sort of just grown. It's not weird now, really, is it? Like that's the whole thing. The top and bottom of it. It was like
It's
they try to
revered,
use
isn't
it
it?
as feared, whereas now people are like sort of a bit envious. One would you'd love to have magic powers, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
I mean, if you could say, "Oh yeah, I'm a wizard or a witch,"
yeah.
class,
And if you
brilliant.
if so, if
But
you were to come across someone, a man or woman, who was to say, "Oh well, I do practice Wicca, or I use natural remedies as healing," there's nothing in you that would
you
say
couldn't
that. Let's
scream witch and have
persecute her.
them. Yeah,
Yeah, you
you
just
couldn't
think, "Oh,
scream
good for
witch.
you. That's really interesting. Tell
Really,
me
yeah,
more."
you're lying.
Is it is it because science rules now, and we know that
Yeah,
these people aren't a threat?
it's more the age of science, really, isn't it?
I find it really fascinating because I think that there is a power in nature, and I'm fascinated by Wicca. It's not something that I obviously follow, but I think it's a really, really interesting and really natural pers what's the word? It's religion. Yeah, it's a classified
Yeah,
religion, Wicca,
I
isn't
think
it?
so.
I think it's really, really fascinating and does a lot of good, and I think it's a lot of mindfulness as well. I think there's got to be a power in nature that you always say we're agnostic, aren't we, to some extent with religion? Would you say?
I'm
Well,
just
I speak for
open-minded
myself.
to it all.
Yeah, but we always that's what I mean. We always say there's got to be more, hopefully more to it than just chance.
Yeah, you've got to hope, haven't you?
Yeah, but just yeah. So later, witchcraft has become more popular and has heavily penetrated popular culture through the medium of music, art, film, and TV, which is what we kind of went through early at the start of the episode.
Yeah.
And to this day, children make believe through dressing up as witches and wizards and obsess over books like Harry Potter. However, it must put a caveat in there that it is still dangerous in some parts of the world to be labelled a witch. It's not over, the persecution of witchcraft. Whether you believe in it or not, there's lots of cultures, for example, Central African cultures who believe if you're born with albinism, if you're albino, that's a sign of witchcraft. And some of their cultures with certain things, like if you've got like birthmarks are a big one as well. It's a sign of or just superstitious things like that. So
Hmm.
it is still dangerous. So is there any truth in it? We'll end the first part there before we dive into some real stories from history. Um, are witches real? Have you ever seen
Well,
one?
I
Don't
don't
don't.
think actual. Yes. I don't think actual magic powers and stuff. I mean, I
Mm,
hope that they are, but I don't think actual magic powers, but like the fact like people use like herbs and stuff for healing and
Oh,
that,
yeah, of
like that's
course.
obviously real.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how you look at it.
So you don't believe that there's someone out there who has
I
powers?
really hope there is, but
I think,
I would
you
want to
know,
see it.
I believe this more than ghosts.
Well, magic powers.
And I'm not talking about, Expelliarmus. I'm talking about people who have slight power over nature because they've tapped into something. I'm a
Well,
big
yeah,
believer
that,
in
that
there's
is
more
true though, because
powers.
like you've seen like the videos and stuff. Like, if you what like there's been those TV shows, hasn't there, where they've looked at people who have got like superhumans, and it's like that guy. Was he in India or something, and he could like touch an electric, and he could withstand a lot like higher voltage than normal people and
Yeah,
stuff
but
like
is
that.
that witchcraft, or is that because he's managed to unleash some part of his brain that other people can't tap into? I think we've, like I said last
I just think his
episode,
body's formed different to others. I mean, he's got like
his
dense,
nerve
definitely,
ends.
yeah,
Oh,
like
well,
different
is it? That's a
nerves
real
and
thing.
denser bones and
Yeah,
all
so
that
that's
sort of
not really
stuff. Yeah.
magic, is it? No, no, I don't mean that. I mean, like, it's the people who can, we've all come across those people who in life who are quite, you could say, manipulative, but can they influence others? They've got is there something that people have got where they can, like people like in history, like Hitler and, famous people who have got the power to kind of almost what's the word? Hex people,
Bewitch people.
bewitch people, you know?
Nah,
Oh, I think there's something, some people have got
gift of the gab in
something.
it.
Gift of the, oh, really, not always. Anyway, the Bell Witch. Have you heard of the Bell Witch?
Yeah, trying to think of it though.
So, our first story of a real life sorcerer even takes place in America in the early 1800s. Now, I got this research from a site called Atlas Obscura. So, John Bell was a farmer in 1817. The Bell homestead was in Red River, Tennessee, an hour north of Nashville, near the Kentucky border in what is now the town of Adams. We sometimes get listeners from America to this podcast. I,
Hmm.
I don't know if they have a clue what we're saying with this accent, but
I hope so.
it's an amazing place. I would love to travel further in, the more the southern parts of America, like
Aye.
Nashville. So John and his wife Lucy had 6 children, including a daughter named Betsy, who was 12 when the troubles began. One night in fall 1817, John Bell was walking through his cornfield when he came across a strange animal, unlike any he'd ever seen before. Assuming it was some kind of dog, he shot at it and fled.
Of course, something random in the field. Get the gun.
In our country, like you'd probably be I was gonna say you get life for that, but our laws are pretty lax, really.
Ah, yeah, I
I
know
can't
what you're
imagine
saying.
that. Milo, I hope you're listening under the table there. We've got a little dog who's just like, God, we're just having a wee.
I had to stop for a minute.
I can still feel me leg scratching. Um, Other disquieting events followed. His son Drew saw a strange bird soon thereafter, and Betsy reported seeing the body of a young girl in a green dress hanging from the trees in the forest nearby. So it escalated quite quickly. Um, Whatever it was, it didn't stay in the forest or fields for long. Strange sounds.
Got shot at, of course it didn't.
It's coming in safe for safety.
Oh dear.
Where's the bomb shelter?
Mm.
Strange sounds filled the house at odd hours, including mysterious knocking, the sounds of rats gnawing at bedposts, dogs barking and snarling, and chains being dragged across the floor. Bed sheets were torn from sleepers, and pillows were jerked from beneath their heads. Eventually, the Bells began to hear a woman's voice. The entity, it seemed, could talk, and she talked a lot. She knew scripture and seemingly things about the family that no one else could know. At first, a pleasant curiosity and devoutly religious entity, the entity soon turned sour, insulting John, trying to interfere with Betsy's love life, gossiping, and even resorting to spewing racist insults. The entity became a legend. Everyone in Red River knew of the Bell's resident spirit. Ingram's telling explained that visitors came from all over to bear witness, including war hero and future President Andrew Jackson, who spent a night with his men attempting to draw out the spirit. Though she was happy to entertain or torment visitors like a tourist attraction, her most singular, consistent attribute was an abiding hatred of John Bell. While she was, perhaps surprisingly, exceedingly kind to Bell's wife, she heaped abuse and scorn on on the homestead's patriarch for years, tormenting him until he grew sick and frail. In December 1820, John came down with what would be his final illness. The attending doctor discovered a mysterious vial, half filled with a dark-coloured liquid. Upon discovery of this vial, the chatty Bell witch crowed triumphantly. It's useless for you to try to revive old Jack. I have got him this time. He will never get up from that bed again. Referring to the vial, she affirmed, I put it there and gave old Jack a big old dose of it last night while he was asleep, which fixed him. John Bell died the next day.
Mm.
So I'm curious, it doesn't say this. Where's she talking from? Has she possessed the wife? You know, in some cases, like the Enfield Horton, where they possess a member of the family and they speak through them,
Yeah,
or it's just where's the voice coming from?
maybe it's just like out of nowhere.
It seems it's suspect to me that just it's so horrible
Yeah,
to this man, interferes with the daughter's love life, but it's lovely to
to the
the
wife.
man of the
Yeah, I
family.
really likes the wife. Killed the husband.
Yeah,
Maybe it's because it mugged her off. I shoot her. He mugged
maybe
her.
it's our favorite
Uh,
dog.
I get him.
Hauntings and the stories they spawn require some kind of supernatural explanation, and over the years, many of them end up getting real world explanations too. Mental illness, a desire for attention, natural phenomena misinterpreted. In the case of the Bell Witch, stands out for its lack of explanation on either count. That's what I mean. This is I don't understand this one.
Yeah,
There's marked lack of a consistent narrative for why the Bell family was so plagued, and no simple moral for audiences a century later. The Bell Witch herself offered up any number of explanations while dismissing them all. At one point, she told the family, so how is she telling the family? It hasn't said. This is what I couldn't get to the bottom of. Who, who was she speaking through?
yeah. She's like writing it down somewhere. She's speaking through
I
someone.
think
Is she
she's
just
speaking through the
randomly
wife.
speaking? Yeah,
Gotta
it's
be.
gotta be.
I am the spirit of a person who was buried in the woods nearby, and the grave has been disturbed. My bones disinterred and scattered, and one of my teeth was lost under this house, and I am here looking for that tooth. But when John pried up the floorboards in search of the lost tooth, the witch laughed at him, claiming the whole thing was a joke.
We got you.
Well, you're
Made you
down
look.
there, put the carpets in.
Uh,
The Bell Witch kept changing her story. Other than its desire to harass and ultimately murder John Bell, the witch was also invested in interfering with young Betsy's love life. So this is the daughter. So at the time, she was being courted by a young man named Joshua Gardner, to whom the Bell Witch took an instant dislike. According to Ingram's and authenticated history, the Bell Witch would often warn Betsy, pleading in a soft, melancholy voice, that Gardner was to be avoided, cooing to her, "Please, Betsy Bell, don't have Joshua Gardner. Please, Betsy Bell, don't marry Joshua Gardner." But as with the rest of its motivations, the witch never made her reasoning clear. At one point, one of her interrogators, Reverend James Gunn,
yeah, that
what?
James Gunn, the director's name as well.
Oh, yes, the one you wanted about the other day.
Yeah,
He got in. It was well, he was a reverend who was assigned, I'm guessing, to kind of not exercise, but well, yeah, exercise maybe the witch out. He got a name out of her, and that name was Kate Batts. Batts was a woman who lived in Red River, and she was sometimes described as the witch's human exponent, and was known in town as a big, strident, and coarse woman. So that's interesting. This is actually it's not like she's made a random name up, or yes, I'm this person who lived hundreds of years ago. She was a real woman living in the town
yeah.
who was meant to be the. So unless they're working together, the wife and this woman,
Getting rid of the husband and
maybe,
making
yeah.
sure the daughter didn't marry off.
Mm. But the witch then immediately denied that she had any connection to bats, and yet from then on she answered to the name Kate. And so by the end of Ingram's story, it's not really clear whether the malevolence came from a living witch or a ghost or some kind of other supernatural entity. Could it be a poltergeist or a demon masking as a witch? If
Yeah,
you believe in that.
no.
I don't, so I think it's probably the wife. The narrative, that's really sexist. It's got to be the woman. Burner.
I going on and on about how bad it was straight away.
Come
Witch,
on.
witch.
Um, As such, modern tellers of the story have put their own spin on it. In addition to the films and books, dozens of paranormal podcasts have devoted episodes to the Bell Witch, and nearly every one of them comes up with a different explanation. So we're doing that right now. There's others who've done this far better than we have and given it real in-depth justice. We kind of just like to retell the story and have little quips on the matter. So we don't really come to any conclusion. That sound. Sometimes we do. Thoughts so far before we discuss a few theories?
It's definitely probably just being that the wife wants rid of the husband or something along them lines.
Yeah, I think. So basically, there's lots of different explanations on this one. Some insist that the Bell Farm was on a Native American burial ground. I'm not going to give this one much time of day. It's a standard trope, that one, and it's often exclusively to white Americans, and it's a way of engaging with the Native American genocide while keeping it at arm's length. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yes, there are lots of burial sites of these people, but we're the ones who did it, kind of thing. But the trivialize it, which is really not something we're going to do. So another popular interpretation focuses on a school teacher named Richard Powell, who supposedly wanted to marry Betsy Bell when she was a teenager. Don't say the word. He is said to have summoned the Bell Witch to haunt the family after being rebuffed by Betsy and her father. So that would make sense. Well, not the conjuring a witch up, but why you would hate the dad as well.
yeah.
An explanation that plays up with Betsy's vulnerability in the world of toxic, abusive men. Others conclude that Kate Watts, an unpleasant woman by all accounts, an unmarried woman, was a scapegoat, a version that taints the story with misogyny. That is very true. I think this Kate Watts was probably, Kate Batts, sorry, was probably a woman who lived in the
Just mind
town,
our own business.
minding her own business, maybe never married, vulnerable, and she's being used as a scapegoat. I really,
The full witch, the whole
yeah,
witch thing there. It's like
my
a
money's on the
woman that's
man.
by herself. Yeah.
It doesn't mention the wife, does it, as such?
No, it doesn't. I think it's a lot more out of the two there. If
Hmm.
you had to pick, it would be a lot more believable for it to be Richard Powell than it would be to be Kate
No, he's
Batts.
not. He wasn't in the house.
Aye, but he's got motive for it and stuff, rather
What?
than picking
So
on
you
some
believe he
random
could?
woman.
Yeah, but do you believe he
No, I'm
could
saying if you
summon
had
a
to pick,
witch?
I'm saying if you had to pick between them two,
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
I do think
Yeah,
it's a lot more that it would probably just be the wife, though.
yeah. Or could it be that the mum and the teacher were working together? Because in those days, age differences weren't frowned upon as such, and she's going to marry this Joshua Gardner who's got hasn't got two pennies to rub together. Mum doesn't like him. This guy's a teacher. He's got money,
Why
good
would you want to get rid of
standing.
the dad, though?
Shut a dog.
Killing two, killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. My money's on that one.
Uh,
So, bit of a comical one, that one. Are you ready to hear about a terrifying, bloodthirsty, wicked, baby killing witch?
no, the last bit got us.
Yeah, The Conjuring. So,
All right.
we've seen this film. I'll put my money on that scene is one of the scariest scenes from a horror film that I've ever
Launches
seen.
on top of the
On top of the
wardrobe.
wardrobe. So I had to pick this one to finish us off for today. So this is from All That's Interesting. So before we go through it, what do you remember from the Conjuring of this one? It's the first Conjuring film, isn't it, with Ed and Lorraine Warren?
What about the witch?
Yeah,
Obviously, she was killed. She killed a baby.
yeah,
Did she point? Was it that she killed some other like babies as well? And then she was obviously strung up, and then haunted the house.
yeah. So it slightly differs slightly the real life account, and it's not even clear if that actually was a real. This was real.
Yeah,
There's thoughts that it could have been. She was real. Sorry, she was a real person called this, but whether any of this actually happened is it a legend? I
yeah.
hope it is a legend because it's not very nice listening. So shock warning for this one. We're going to explore the legend of Bathsheba Sherman. She was a real life woman who died in 1885 in Rhode Island, and she's infamous in American witch folklore. However, you might know her better as the Conjuring Witch. So Bathsheba was very much a real person, and she is believed to have been behind the hauntings of the Perrin home in the 1970s. Some believed she was a witch who worshipped Satan, and she was related to Mary Easty, a woman who was hanged in the Salem witch trials. Others believe that Sherman murdered children in the 19th century in Connecticut. As for the actual historical records, they do confirm that a Bathsheba, Thea, was born in 1812, and she'd later marry a farmer named Judson Sherman in Connecticut before birthing a boy named Herbert. The legends, meanwhile, claim that she was later caught sacrificing her son to Satan with a sewing needle, cursing all who would dare live on her land, and then she actually supposedly climbed the tree and hanged herself. She
Whoa.
wasn't strung up. I think you're thinking of something else. Um, According to paranormal investigators, here we go, Ed and Lorraine Warren, Bathsheba Sherman promised to haunt anyone who would go on to occupy the land where her home once sat. So that's a really common one, isn't it? The haunt the land in the house because they don't want anyone taking it from them.
Yeah, it's theirs.
Yeah, and you can get that. I can understand that. The couple was contacted by the Perrin family who had moved onto the property in 1971. So this is where the film takes us, the family in the film when they moved to this house.
Yeah.
And household items had begun to vanish, and their children were supposedly visited nightly by a malevolent female spirit. Their eldest daughter, Andrea Perrin, has since chronicled her traumatizing childhood in the House of Darkness, House of Light. While skeptics say that the Warrens are mere profiteers of the unexplained, Perrin has yet to waver from her story. So often these kids grow up and they'll say things like, "Well, actually, we made it up. This happened, and it really." But she's adamant that it
Yeah, it
all
happened
happened.
from the second Conjuring, and they started changing the
Yeah,
stories
that
and
it was
stuff.
all for attention and things, but this one, they don't deviate from it massively. But to separate from fact from fiction when it comes to the true story of The Conjuring, we must return to the real life of Bathsheba Sherman to see what actually happened. So, by all accounts, Bathsheba Thea had a relatively contented childhood. She would grow into an envied beauty, and she tied the knot at 32 years old in 1844. For an envied beauty in the 1800s, that's quite late to
I
get
was just going to
married.
say that's quite late, isn't it?
Should usually be snapped up, wouldn't you? And you, that's quite late.
Yeah,
Her hustle is there was the problems, mental health problems maybe. Or
potentially. Yeah, yeah.
now I know that sounds really sexist to say that in a modern life, but in those days, for a beauty from a well-to-do family, that's quite late to get married,
If
32.
it's a well-to-do family, though, maybe they didn't, because a lot of the time back then it was for to try and make money and stuff, wasn't it? They
Yeah,
married them to families, so maybe if she was coming from a well-to-do family anyway, they didn't.
yeah, maybe. So her husband ran a profitable produce business from his 200-acre farm in Harrisville, Rhode Island, but the community would soon see the newlywed wife as a threat. Bathsheba Sherman had been babysitting her neighbour's son when the young boy mysteriously died. Worst nightmare.
Aye,
Local doctors established that the child's skull had been impaled by a small but albeit fatal tool. And despite the fact that Sherman was the last to tend to the boy, the case never went to court and the local women were enraged. So I can imagine that.
yeah,
Someone's hurt a child and she's got off kind of scot-free with this one.
yeah,
So, according to legend, Bathsheba Sherman's son would never celebrate his first birthday, as his mother stabbed him to death a week after he was born. Her confounded husband is said to have caught her in the act and witnessed her vowing allegiance to the devil before climbing the tree where she would hang from in 1849. While some claim that they had 3 other children, there are no census records of this to exist, and some remain convinced, however, that none of these siblings lived past 7. Ultimately, Bathsheba Sherman's story remains largely unsourced, while records confirm that Judson Sherman died in 1881. You've got to remember in this time that a lot of children didn't make it to 7
yeah,
because of illness and, cot death and things. There's no evidence that she did this. It could be that she'd been babysitting one night and something a terrible accident happened, and people have wanted to blame her rather than the child's fallen and fell on something dangerous,
yeah,
and then her own child dies. She
yeah.
could have been it
Stops.
could have been she could have been very unlucky and persecuted for this. You know,
I hope that's the case and that she
I
didn't actually
feel
do it.
like
So,
I well, I don't know. When with Bathsheba Sherman's tombstone in downtown Harrisville revealing her date of death as May the 25th, 1885, her alleged suicide in 1849, it's fabricated, so she was an old woman when she died. So there you go. I think
yeah,
this has been made up. Today, Andrea Perrin is unconvinced that it was Sherman who terrorized her as a child at all, but actually the neighbouring Arnold estate matriarch who hanged herself in the barn in 1797. So apparently, in lot of years earlier, in the 1700s, a woman actually did hang herself, and maybe she did something,
yeah.
and it's been conflated. You just don't know, do you? It's a terrifying film, though, isn't it?
Brilliant film,
It's
yeah.
a really
It's
good.
really good.
Yeah, we do like that one, the Conjuring.
Same makers as
It's is
Insidious.
it? Yeah, the same. The guy's the same as the actor. I don't know
Yeah,
his name, but it
the
good
one who
looking
plays
guy.
Warren.
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
him. The Perrin family haunting and the true story of the Conjuring. So, a financially strapped truck driver, Roger Perrin, was overjoyed to close on the modestly priced 14-bedroom farmhouse in 1970. The family moved in the following January. His wife Carolyn and their 5 daughters had transitioned into the new house well, until odd noises started emanating from empty rooms and items went missing. The children began to speak to spirits visiting them in the night. One was a boy named Oliver Richardson, who befriended Andrea's sister April. Cindy saw them too, and reminded a saddened April that these spirits couldn't leave the house to play and they were actually trapped indoors. My father just wanted them to go away, to pretend none of it was happening, just a figment of our imagination, said Andrea. But when it started happening to him too, he really couldn't deny it any longer. Carolyn Perrin was finding neatly piled dirt in the middle of rooms she had just finished cleaning with no one at home, and meanwhile Andrea was being tormented nightly by a malevolent female spirit with a bent neck that she believed had been hanged. That's quite like Bent Neck Lady. Oh, Haunting on Hill House.
Oh yeah.
Isn't it a bit? Andrea believed it wanted to possess her mother to kill her and her siblings. Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position, said Andrea. Yes, I get that. So she's targeting the mum this time because she was always the female figure in the house.
Yeah.
When Caroline Perrin heard of this, she contacted a local historian who told her of Bathsheba Sherman and that she enjoyed starving and beating her farmhands. The record showed that the Sherman farm, sorry, had been in the same family for 8 decades, and that many who lived there had died oddly, drowning, hanging, murder. Convinced that Bathsheba was haunting them, the parents contacted the Warrens. A self-taught demonologist and self-described clairvoyant, Ed and Lorraine respectively, agreed with the assessment. The couple conducted a séance in 1974, during which Caroline Perrin allegedly got possessed and she nearly died. So, according to Andrea Perrin, her mother's body contorted into a ball. Her mother's screams led Andrea to believe that she died. She claimed that her mother was possessed for several minutes and was slammed against the floor with her head. Her mother was temporarily unconscious before returning to her former self. I thought I was going to pass out, said Andrea. My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice that wasn't her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room. As chronicled in her book and the Bathsheba Search for Evil documentary, Andrea Perrin's father kicked the Warrens out for good after that. They returned only one more time to ensure Caroline Perrin had survived the seance. I mean, it's not really their fault,
Ah, you know.
unless he's like picked her up and chucked her to the chair himself.
He rolled her up and chucked her off the wall.
Yeah, that's a funny one, that isn't it? Why's the dad chucked them out?
Like they asked them there to get rid of them. If they got rid of it, why would he then chuck them out?
My theory, I think the mum was very suggestible, and these two have come in, and the mum's got maybe mental illness.
Yeah.
The mum's got the kids all riled up. The kids are terrified. She's jumping around on a chair, and he's just thought, "Nah,
No thanks.
get out of
Stop
here right
this.
now. That you're causing mayhem." I can imagine that 'cause if the mum's kind of believing it and he's not.
Yeah.
I don't know, but then again, like she seemed, there's no evidence of this woman being mentally ill.
Yeah.
The kids on to this day, it's not like she's saying, "Oh yeah, actually looking back, ma'am did have some problems." She's saying, "No, that this was possession." Interesting. Either way, they were forced, unfortunately, to live in that house until 1980 due to the financial reasons, and we see that on the film because they're kind of cash strapped on. They bought this house and they can't get rid of it,
Yeah. All
really.
the money's in there. Trying to do with it, aren't they?
Yeah, so ultimately, the presence of Ed and Lorraine Warren has become fodder for skeptics who may have good reason to dismiss them as frauds. The story in general has become streamlined and exaggerated in The Conjuring. Yes, it's heavily exaggerated, as you would imagine, to be fair. And the true story of The Conjuring remains unknowledgeable, unknowable even. While Andrea Perrin claims to remember every single terrifying detail, we don't really know if it's true. We've
Yeah.
got to take her word for it, really. The things that went on there were just so incredibly frightening, she said. It still affects me to talk about it today. Both my mother and I would just sooner swallow our tongue than tell a lie. People are free to believe whatever they want to believe, but I know what we experienced. So yeah, I think it's interesting. She's saying I'm not going to lie. So what would you have to gain from it? Maybe fame, you could say, attention, but I don't know. Is that good
She still
attention?
owns the house. She could get people to go and visit it.
Yeah, I suppose. I don't know if they got any rights from the film. That'd be interesting. Surely would have.
Surely they would have.
Perrin, yeah, they would
Yeah.
have. She claims the film took liberties. That's interesting, like adding blood or replacing the seance with an exorcism. But ultimately, it's likely most would never have heard of Bathsheba Sherman without the Conjuring film, which is true. Legend has it that she turned into stone when she died. Others blamed a rare type of paralysis, which, like most aspects of the Bathsheba Sherman story, appears more likely than the supernatural. So, what's she turned into stone when she died?
She, maybe she had tetanus or something and she
Yeah,
or
but don't
froze
don't
up or
don't you
something.
go stiff, don't you? And that's what they call dead bodies.
Aye.
Yeah. So what do we think ultimately to wrap it up? Witchcraft, the idea of witchcraft is a con artist, are the people who can control the elements, or is it all just make believe?
Oh, I think it's all the vast majority of it's probably make believe. I think there's probably like bits here and there that are true.
Hmm.
Like I said before, like obviously like using herbs and stuff like that to heal people and that. Like, I guess those sort of bits are obviously true,
Hmm.
but I think for the most part, made up.
And I've got to end on a really serious, quite heavy question. If you don't, I know you don't like questions like this, but I'm going to end it like this way. Who would win in a fight, Harry Potter or Sabrina?
Harry Potter. It's not a question, is it?
Oh, I'm going to go for Sabrina. She's got her answers.
Yeah, and Harry's got Dumbledore.
Harvey.
Again, I'll win.
Harvey Kinkle. So thank you so much for listening. I've got to say, recently have started trying to promote us a little bit more on Instagram, haven't I? Because we have just started out and it really is a hobby for us. We both work full time. We are parents, and we do try our best with to try and make the time to look into the stories and do as much research as we can. And I was a bit kind of reluctant, wasn't I, just to share it on Instagram because you've got that fear factor. But we bit the bullet, we went for it. We want to say thank you to you all who've been liking the page on Instagram. So it's Ghost Creatures and Scares. Oh my! If you haven't followed us already, we put a lot of things on there, like when the new episodes are coming out, and I try and put some content on there as well. And it's been fantastic to meet. Well, I say meet to talk to people, get to know different people who are in this community and doing an absolutely amazing things that we could only aspire to, really. But if you have enjoyed listening to this, please tell a friend about us. So, yeah, please give us a follow and please share us with your friends. Thank you very much.
Next time we'll be hearing about some incredibly creepy stories of haunting paintings. Haunted paintings, not haunting. See you soon.